The fluorescent lights in the Queens Community Center made everything look tired and old, including the woman who sat alone in the back row of the small auditorium. Milin Chen was 34 years old, and she looked every bit of it tonight. Maybe even older if she was being honest with herself. Her hands were rough from years of working with chemicals at the dry cleaning shop on Roosevelt Avenue, and her shoulders carried the permanent hunch of someone who spent too many hours bent over a pressing machine. She had come straight from work, still wearing her faded blue uniform with a name tag that read Linda, because her boss said American customers found that easier to say. The community center smelled like old coffee and floor wax, and the metal folding chairs squeaked every time someone shifted their weight. Parents filled the rows in front of her, chatting happily about their children, comparing notes about schools and soccer practice and summer camps. Milin did not join these conversations, because she rarely had time for such things, and because her English, even after 22 years in America, still made her feel like a stranger in her own neighborhood. Her daughter Lily was backstage somewhere, probably nervous, probably wondering if her mother had actually shown up this time. Milin had missed so many of these events over the years, always working, always picking up extra shifts to pay for things that other families seemed to afford without trying. But tonight was different, because tonight Milin had made a promise, and because tonight, for reasons she did not fully understand, she had agreed to do something foolish. She had signed up to perform. The sign-up sheet had been passed around at the last parent meeting, and Mrs. Rodriguez, the event coordinator, it had practically begged for adult volunteers. We need parents to participate too, she had said with that bright smile that Milin found exhausting. It shows the children that everyone can share their talents, no matter how simple. Simple was the word that had caught Milin's attention. You don't have to do anything fancy, Mrs. Rodriguez had continued. Maybe just play a little song on the piano before the kids perform. Something easy like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, just to warm up the audience. And before Milin could stop herself, before her brain could remind her of all the reasons this was a terrible idea, her hand had moved across the paper and written her name in the volunteer slot. She had not touched a piano in over a decade. That was not entirely true, because sometimes late at night when she could not sleep, she would sit at the kitchen table and move her fingers across the surface as if playing invisible keys. Her hands remembered things that her heart had tried very hard to forget. The community center piano sat on the small stage at the front of the room, an old upright with chipped keys and a finish that had seen better days. Milin could tell just by looking at it that some of the keys would stick, and that the tuning would be off by at least a quarter tone in the upper register. These were things she should not know, things that belonged to a different version of herself, a version that had died somewhere between Shanghai and New York. Excuse me, are you Lily's mom? A woman with blonde hair and expensive-looking yoga pants had turned around in her seat to face Milin. Yes, Milin said, keeping her answer short as she always did. Oh, wonderful. Lily is just the sweetest thing. She and my daughter Madison are in the same reading group. Are you excited to play tonight? The woman's smile was friendly enough, but Milin could see the quick flicker of assessment in her eyes, the way she took in the work uniform and the rough hands and filed Milin away in some mental category. It is just a simple song. Milin said, well, I think it's so brave of you to volunteer. I could never get up there in front of everyone. I have absolutely no musical talent whatsoever. The woman laughed at herself, in a way that suggested she had many other talents that more than made up for this small defeat. Nodded politely and was relieved when the woman turned back around to continue her conversation with another parent. Brave who's not the right word for what Milin was feeling. Terrified was closer, but even that did not capture the strange mix of emotions churning in her stomach. There was fear, yes, but there was also something else, something that felt almost like hunger, like her body was starving for something it had been denied for too long. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses and the small scars from steam burns, at the fingernails she kept short for practical reasons. These were not the hands of a pianist anymore, were the hands of a woman who worked 60 hours a week to keep a small apartment and put food on the table for her daughter. These were the hands of a survivor, not an artist. But once, a lifetime ago, these same hands had made grown men weep. These hands had moved across piano keys with such speed and precision that teachers had run out of words to describe what they were witnessing. Once, a 7-year-old girl in Shanghai had been called a miracle. Milin closed her eyes and tried to push those memories back down where they belonged, in the locked box at the bottom of her heart where she kept all the things that hurt too much to remember. The program for tonight's event was printed on cheap paper, and Milin's name appeared at the very beginning, listed simply as parent volunteer piano. No one in this room knew who she really was, and that was exactly how she wanted it. No one knew about the hours of practice that had started before sunrise and ended long after dark. No one knew about the competitions and the medals and the newspaper articles that had called her the future of Chinese classical music. No one knew about the night her father had come home with empty pockets and red eyes and told her that everything was gone. The lights in the auditorium flickered, signaling that the show would begin soon. Parents settled into their seats and pulled out their phones, ready to record their children's precious moments. Somewhere backstage, Lily was probably smoothing down her dress and practicing her lines for the short play she would perform with her classmates. And in the back row, A woman in a dry cleaner's uniform sat with her rough hands folded in her lap, wondering how she had let herself get talked into this twinkle, twinkle, little star. That was all she had to ply a nursery rhyme that any child could learn in a week surely. Her hands could manage that much without betraying her, without revealing the secret she had spent 2 decades trying to bury. The house lights dimmed, and Mrs. Rodriguez walked onto the stage with a microphone and that same bright smile. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our annual Family Talent Night. Applause filled the small room as parents clapped and cheered before our wonderful children take the stage. We have a special treat. One of our parent volunteers has agreed to warm us up with a little piano music. So please give a warm welcome to Lily Chen's mother. More applause, polite and scattered. The kind of applause people give when they are being nice but do not expect much. Mylin stood up slowly, her knees protesting from too many hours on her feet. The walk from the back row to the stage felt like a mile, and with every step, she could feel the memories pressing against the walls of that locked box in her heart. She climbed the 3 small stairs to the stage and walked toward the piano. The instrument that had once been her whole world. The instrument she had abandoned like an old friend. She no longer deserved. The bench creaked as she sat down, and she positioned herself in front of the keys, her posture automatically correcting itself into the perfect form that had been drilled into her since childhood. She placed her hands on the keys and felt the cool ivory beneath her fingertips, and in that moment, something stirred in the darkness of her memory, something that had been sleeping for 22 years, something that was finally beginning to wake up. Shanghai in the summer of 1995 was a city of contradictions, where ancient temples stood in the shadows of rising skyscrapers and where the sound of traditional street vendors mixed with the honking of modern traffic. A small apartment on the 5th floor of a concrete building in the Jing'an district. A 7-year-old girl sat at a piano that took up half the living room. Her name was Maylin, and she had been playing since before she could remember. Her mother liked to tell the story of how Maylin had climbed onto the piano bench at age 3 and played a melody she had heard on the radio, note for note, without a single mistake. She is not normal, her grandmother had said, and she had not meant it as an insult. The piano had belonged to Maylin's grandfather, a music teacher who had survived the Cultural Revolution by hiding his instrument in a neighbor's basement. He had died before Maylin was born, but his piano had remained, heavy wooden upright with yellowed keys and a sound that Maylin thought was the most beautiful thing in the world. Every morning, her mother would wake her at 5 o'clock. Before the sun had risen over the city, time to practice, her mother would whisper, and Maylin would shuffle to the piano in her pajamas, still half asleep, her fingers finding the keys in the darkness. By the time she was 5, she could play Mozart in Bach and Beethoven. By 6, she had won her first competition, standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people, her feet barely reaching the pedals. By 7, she had been accepted into the Shanghai Conservatory of Music, the youngest student in the history of the program. The teachers there did not know what to make of her at first. She is too small, one of them had complained. Her hands cannot reach a full octave. But then they heard her play, and their objections turned to silence. Maylin's teacher at the conservatory was a stern woman named Professor Wong, who had studied in Moscow and had little patience for children who did not take music seriously. She had reduced many students to tears with her harsh criticisms and impossible demands. But with Maylin, Professor Wong was different. You have something that cannot be taught, she had told Maylin after their first lesson. You have the gift, but gifts are dangerous things. They can be wasted, they can be stolen, they can break your heart if you are not careful. Maylin had not understood what her teacher meant at the time. She only knew that she loved the piano the way other children loved their toys and their pets. When she played, the rest of the world disappeared, and there was only the music, only the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers, only the sound that poured out of her like water from a spring. Her father worked for a trading company, and in those days, business was good. He would come home late at night smelling of cigarettes and expensive cologne, his pockets full of money that he would spread across the kitchen table with a proud smile. For my little Mozart, he would say, pulling out gifts for Maylin, new music books and recordings of famous pianists, and once, a small gold necklace with a treble clef pendant. Her mother would smile and shake her head, and her grandmother would mutter about the dangers of spoiling children. But Maylin could see that they were all happy. Life was good in those days, and it seemed like it would be good forever. The competitions came faster as Maylin grew older. She won in Shanghai, then in Beijing, then in Hong Kong. Newspapers began to write about her, calling her the little piano princess and China's Mozart. A famous pianist from America came to the conservatory to give a masterclass, and after hearing Maylin play, he had spoken to her parents for a long time in hushed tones. She could be one of the greats, he had said. With the right training, with the right opportunities, she could perform on the biggest stages in the world. Her parents had nodded seriously, already making plans for their daughter's glorious future. But plans, as Maylin would learn, meant nothing when the world decided to fall apart. It started slowly, so slowly that at first no one noticed. Her father began coming home later and later, and the proud smile disappeared from his face. The gifts stopped, and then the music books stopped, and then the conversations at the dinner table became short and strained. Maylin was 10 years old when she first heard her parents fighting about money. She had crept out of bed to get a glass of water and had stopped in the hallway, listening to her mother's angry whispers and her father's defeated voice. How could you lose everything? Her mother demanded. I trusted the wrong people. Her father said, they promised the investment was safe. They promised we would triple our money, and now we have nothing. Now we have less than nothing. Now we have debts that we can never repay. Maylin did not understand all the words, but she understood the fear in her mother's voice. And that fear crept into her own heart and made a home there. The changes came quickly after that first. They moved from their nice apartment to a smaller one in a cheaper neighborhood. Then her grandmother moved in with them, bringing her own bed and her own complaints about the cramped space. Then the conversations about America began. My cousin in New York says there are jobs, her mother said one night. Good jobs, stable jobs. We could start over, but what about Maylin's training? Her father asked. What about the conservatory? What about her future? Her future is with her family, her mother replied. A family that needs to eat and have a roof over their heads. Maylin played the piano more furiously in those final months in China, as if she could somehow hold on to a life through the music she practiced until her fingers bled, until Professor Wong had to send her home to rest. You play like someone who is drowning, her teacher observed. You play like someone who is trying to grab onto the music before it slips away. Maylin could not deny it because that was exactly how she felt the night before they left for America. Maylin sat at her grandfather's piano for the last time. Her father had sold it earlier that week to pay for plane tickets and immigration fees, and the new owners were coming to pick it up in the morning. She played for hours, all of her favorite pieces, all of the music that had been her whole world for as long as she could remember. Her mother came to sit beside her on the bench, something she had not done since Maylin was very small. I am sorry, her mother whispered. I know this is hard for you. Will there be a piano in America? Maylin asked. Her mother was silent for a long time, and that silence was answer enough. We will find a way, her mother finally said. Somehow, someday, we will find a way. But Maylin knew that these were just words, the kind of words adults say when they do not want to tell children the truth. The plane to New York was long and uncomfortable, and Maylin spent most of the flight looking out the window at the clouds below. She was 12 years old, and everything she had ever known was disappearing behind her. The Shanghai Conservatory had given her a letter of recommendation, and Professor Wong had hugged her for the first and only time. Do not forget who you are, her teacher had said. The gift is inside you. It will always be inside you, even if you cannot use it. Queens was nothing like Shanghai. The apartment they moved into was even smaller than the one they had left, and the walls were thin enough that Maylin could hear their neighbors arguing in Spanish on one side and watching loud television on the other. Her father found work at a restaurant, washing dishes for less money in a week than he used to spend on a single dinner. Her mother took a job at a garment factory, coming home each night with aching hands and tired eyes. And Maylin, the girl who had been called a miracle, enrolled in a public school where no one knew her name and no one cared about her gift. There was no piano in their new apartment, and there was no money for lessons. Maylin would sometimes walk to a music store on Main Street and stand outside the window, watching customers try out the instruments she could no longer afford to play. A salesman noticed her and invited her inside. Go ahead, he said, gesturing to a beautiful black grand piano in the center of the store. You can try it if you want. Maylin sat down and placed her hands on the keys, but she could not make herself play the music that had once flowed through her so easily. Now felt locked away behind a door she did not have the strength to open. She thanked the salesman and left, and she did not go back to that store again. The years passed, and Maylin stopped thinking of herself as a pianist. She became a student, then a worker, then a wife for a short time to a man who did not stay, then a mother to a daughter she named Lily. The gift that Professor Wong had spoken of grew quiet inside her, like a fire that had been smothered but not completely extinguished. Sometimes, late at night, Maylin would dream of the piano, would dream of the conservatory and the competitions and the newspaper headlines. She would dream of her grandfather's old upright, with the yellowed keys on. She would wake up with tears on her face and an ache in her chest that never completely went away. 22 years had passed since she had left Shanghai, and in all that time, Maylin had never told anyone about the girl she used to be. The girl was dead, buried in the past along with all the other things that hurt too much to remember, or so Maylin believed, until the night she sat down at a battered piano in a Queens community center and placed her hands on the keys once more. The apartment on the 4th floor of a brick building in Jackson Heights was small but clean, kept that way through years of habit and necessity. Maylin had lived here for 11 years now, ever since Lily's father had walked out and left them with nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. The rent was too high for what they got, but the neighborhood was safe, and the school was good. And those were the things that mattered when you were raising a daughter. On your on it was 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, the night before the talent show, and Maylin sat at the kitchen table with her phone in her hands. That screen glowed with a free piano app she had downloaded earlier that day, a simple program that showed a keyboard and played notes when you touched it. She felt ridiculous, a grown woman sitting in the dark with a phone app, trying to remember how to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. But she had made a promise, and she would not break it. Not this time. Lily was in the living room, pretending to watch television but actually watching her mother through the doorway between the rooms. The girl was 9 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she had learned early in life to pay attention to the things adults tried to hide. Mama, what are you doing? she finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Practicing, Malin said, not looking up from the phone. Practicing what? A song for tomorrow night. Lily got up from the couch and walked into the kitchen, standing beside her mother's chair with a particular authority that 9-year-olds possess when they sense something interesting. Can I hear it? Malin hesitated, then touched the keys on the screen, playing the simple melody of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. The sound that came from the phone's tiny speaker was thin and artificial, nothing like the rich tones of a real piano. But Lily listened with serious attention. That is the song you are going to play? She asked. Yes, it is very easy, Lily said, and there was no judgment in her voice, just honest observation. Yes, Malin agreed. It is very easy. Why did you sign up to play the piano, Mama? This was the question Malin had been asking herself ever since her hand had written her name on that volunteer sheet. She did not have a good answer, or at least not one she could explain to a 9-year-old. I do not know, she admitted. I think I just wanted to try. Lily nodded, as if this made perfect sense, because two children wanting to try something is always reason enough. She pulled out the chair beside her mother and sat down, her feet swinging above the floor because she was still too short for them to reach. Do you know how to play the piano? Lily asked. The question hung in the air between them, simple and complicated at the same time. Malin looked at her daughter's open face, at the genuine curiosity in her eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. I used to, she said quietly, a long time ago, before you were born, before I came to America. Really? Lily's eyes widened with surprise. You never told me that. I do not talk about it much. Why not? Malin set the phone down on the table and looked at her hands, at the rough skin and the short nails, at the fingers that had once danced across keys with such speed that audiences had gasped. Because it makes me sad, she said, and I do not like being sad. Lily considered this for a moment, her young mind processing information that was beyond her years but not beyond her understanding. Were you good? She asked. Malin almost smiled at the directness of the question. Children had no use for modesty or false humility. They simply wanted to know the truth. Yes, Malin said. I was very good. How good? Very, very good, like famous good. Malin felt the locked box in her heart rattle, felt the memories pressing against its walls, demanding to be let out. Almost, she said. I was almost famous, but then things changed, and I had to stop playing. What things? Grown-up things. Things that are hard to explain. Lily accepted this answer because she had learned that some questions did not have easy answers, and because she could see that her mother was struggling with something painful. Will you play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star for me? She asked, touching the phone screen. The real way, not the phone way. We do not have a piano, Malin reminded her. I know, but you could show me on the table, like you do sometimes when you think I am not looking. Malin felt her face flush with embarrassment. She had not realized that Lily had noticed those late-night moments when she sat alone and moved her fingers across imaginary keys. You saw that. Sometimes, Lily said, when I get up to go to the bathroom and you are sitting at the table, your hands move like you are playing something. But there is no sound. Malin did not know what to say. She had tried so hard to bury that part of herself, to lock it away where it could not hurt her. And yet here it was, leaking out in the middle of the night, witnessed by the one person she wanted to protect from her past. I am sorry, she said, though she was not sure what she was apologizing for. Why are you sorry, Mama? Because I wanted to give you more than this. More than a small apartment, and a mother who works too much and misses your school events. Lily shook her head firmly, her dark hair swinging with emotion. I do not want more. I want you to be happy. The simplicity of the statement hit Malin like a wave, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. I am happy, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were not entirely true. Lily looked at her mother with an expression that was far too wise for a 9-year-old. You look sad when you play on the table, she said. Your face gets all quiet and far away, like you were remembering something that hurts. Malin reached out and took her daughter's hand, marveling at how small it still was, how soft and unmarked by work and time. Some memories do hurt, she admitted, but that does not mean they are bad memories. Sometimes the things we loved the most are the things that hurt the most when we lose them. Do you miss the piano? The question was so direct, so perfectly aimed at the center of Malin's heart, that she could not deflect it. Every day, she whispered. Every single day they sat in silence for a moment, mother and daughter, connected by their joined hands and by something deeper that did not need words. Then maybe tomorrow you should not play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Lily said. What do you mean? Maybe you should play something real, something that makes you feel less sad. Malin shook her head, pulling her hand away gently. I cannot do that. It has been too long. I do not remember how, but you remember on the table, Lily pointed out. Remember in your dreams. I hear you sometimes, humming music in your sleep. Malin had not known she did that, and the revelation made her feel exposed, as if all her carefully constructed walls had been made of paper all along. It is not the same, she said. Playing for real is different. It requires practice and preparation. My hands are not what they used to be. Lily picked up the phone and looked at the piano app on the screen. You could practice now, she suggested. I could help you. How could you help me? I could listen and tell you if it sounds good despite everything. Malin felt herself smile. Her daughter's confidence was both touching and absurd. And somehow, in that moment, it was exactly what she needed. Okay, she said, taking the phone back, I will practice, and you will tell me if it sounds good. She touched the keys on the screen, playing the simple melody again, but this time her fingers moved with more confidence, adding small embellishments that came from somewhere deep in her muscle memory. The song was still Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but it was more than that now. It was the same song, dressed up in harmonies and variations that transformed it from a nursery rhyme into something approaching art. Lily listened with her eyes closed, her small face peaceful and concentrated. When Maylin finished, she opened her eyes and smiled. That was different, she said. That was better. It was just some small changes, Maylin said, trying to dismiss what she had done. No, it was not small. It was like magic. Like the song grew up and became something more. Maylin looked at the phone in her hands, at the glowing keys that had carried her back to a place she had been avoiding for 22 years. That locked box in her heart was definitely rattling now, and she was no longer sure she had the strength to keep it closed. Mama, Lily said, reaching out to touch her mother's arm. Why do you look scared? Because I am scared, Maylin admitted. Of what? Of remembering who I used to be. Of wanting things I cannot have anymore. Lily tilted her head to the side, considering this. But what if you can have them? She asked. What if you just forgot that you could? It was a child's logic, simple and impossible and somehow cutting straight to the heart of the matter. What if the door Maylin had locked so long ago was not actually locked at all? What if she had simply convinced herself it was because she was too afraid to try the handle? She looked at the clock on the wall and saw that it was almost 10 past Lily's bedtime on a school night. Time for bed, she said, standing up and putting the phone in her pocket. But I want to hear more, Lily protested. Tomorrow you will hear more, I promise. Lily allowed herself to be shepherded toward her small bedroom, but at the door she turned and looked at her mother with those serious dark eyes. Play the real music tomorrow, Mama. Play the music that makes your hands move at night. I want to hear what it sounds like when it is not silent. Maylin kissed her daughter's forehead and tucked her into bed, but she could not bring herself to make that promise. The Queens Community Center had been built in the 1970s, and it looked every year of its age. The walls were painted that particular shade of beige that institutions seem to favor, the kind of color that exists not to please the eye but to avoid offending anyone. Water stains decorated the ceiling tiles in patterns that almost looked intentional, and the heating system made a constant groaning sound that everyone had learned to ignore. The main auditorium had been transformed for the family talent night, though transformed might have been too strong a word. Someone had hung paper streamers from the basketball hoops, and a hand-painted banner reading "You're All Stars" stretched across the stage in letters that wobbled between enthusiastic and illegible. The folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, their metal frames squeaking in protest every time someone sat down or shifted their weight. Parents filed in through the double doors at the back, clutching programs and phones in the vague hope that their children would not embarrass them too badly. The smell of the place was familiar to anyone who had spent time in such buildings, a mixture of floor wax and old coffee and the particular mustiness of rooms that are cleaned regularly but never quite thoroughly. Maylin arrived at 6:30, half an hour before the show was scheduled to begin. She had come straight from work, not having time to go home and change, and she was acutely aware of how she looked in her faded blue uniform with a name tag that said Linda. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face bore the tired lines of a 12-hour shift spent pressing other people's clothes. She found a seat in the back row, hoping to remain invisible until her name was called. The chair creaked loudly as she sat down, and several parents turned to look at her before quickly looking away. Maylin was used to being overlooked, and most days she preferred it that way. The piano sat on the stage, illuminated by the fluorescent lights that washed everything in their harsh, unflattering glow. It was an old upright, probably donated years ago by someone who no longer wanted it, and even from her seat in the back row, Maylin could see that it had not been treated kindly. The finish was scratched and dull. The bench was covered in cracked vinyl, and some of the black keys had chips in them that revealed the white wood underneath. But it was still a piano, still 88 keys connected to hammers connected to strings, still capable of making music if the right hands touched it. Maylin had not slept well the night before. After putting Lily to bed, she had stayed up late, her hands moving across the kitchen table in the darkness, playing music that no one could hear. She had practiced Twinkle Twinkle Little Star until it felt mechanical and safe, and then, without meaning to, she had let her fingers wander into other territory. The Chopin had come back to her like a language she had not spoken in decades but had never truly forgotten. Her hands remembered the phrases, the dynamics, the particular way certain passages needed to breathe. It was both thrilling and terrifying, like meeting a version of herself she had believed was dead now. Sitting in the community center with her work uniform and her rough hands, she tried to push those memories back down. Tonight was not about her. It was about the children, about Lily, about playing a simple nursery rhyme and then disappearing back into anonymity. Excuse me, is this seat taken? A man in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes gestured to the chair beside her. No, please, Maylin said, moving her bag to make room. The man sat down with the careful movements of someone whose joints had begun to protest. Grandchildren? He asked, nodding toward the stage daughter. Maylin replied, wonderful. I am here for my grandson Marcus. He is doing a magic trick though, between you and me. I have seen him practice and the rabbit may not cooperate. Malin found herself smiling despite her nervousness. There was something warm about the man, something that invited conversation without demanding it. What about you? He asked. Are you just here to watch, or are you part of the show? The question made Malin's stomach tighten. I am playing the piano, she said quietly. Just a short song before the children perform. A pianist? How lovely. I used to teach music at City College. RETIRED. Now of course, but I still appreciate a good performance. Malin felt a flutter of something that might have been Panicate music professor. Of all the people to sit beside, she had chosen a chair next to someone who would actually know what he was listening to. It is nothing special, she said quickly. Just Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. A warm-up for the audience. The man nodded thoughtfully. But even simple songs can reveal a great deal about the person playing them. The way someone approaches a melody, the choices they make with dynamics and tempo, these things tell stories that the performer might not even realize they are telling. Malin did not know how to respond to this, so she simply nodded and looked toward the stage, hoping to end the conversation. More parents were arriving now, filling the rows of squeaky folding chairs, creating a hum of conversation that echoed off the gymnasium walls. Mrs. Rodriguez, the event coordinator, rushed past in a blur of nervous energy, checking her clipboard and speaking into a walkie-talkie with the urgency of someone directing a much more important production. The house lights flickered twice, the signal that the show would begin in 5 minutes. Malin felt her heart rate increase, felt her palms grow damp despite the cool air in the room. She wiped her hands on her uniform pants, a habit she had developed at work when she needed to grip something important. The piano waited on the stage, patient and silent, and Malin could not stop looking at it. It was not a good instrument. She could tell that from here, but it was still a piano, still connected to all the pianos she had ever played, still a doorway to the music that lived inside her. Are you all right? The gray-haired man asked, and she realized she had been staring at the stage with an intensity that must have seemed strange. Yes, just nervous, she admitted. That is natural. Even the greatest performers get nervous. It shows you care about what you are doing. The greatest performers, Malin thought, and the irony of those words landing on her ears made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. Mrs. Rodriguez climbed onto the stage, her heels clicking against the wooden floor, and picked up a microphone that squealed with feedback before settling into compliance. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our annual Family Talent Night at the Queens Community Center. Applause rippled through the audience, the polite kind that happens at the beginning of events when people are still settling in. We have a wonderful show planned for you tonight, with performances from our amazing children and a few brave parents who volunteered to participate. More applause. A few laughs at the word brave. Malin gripped the edges of her seat. Before we bring out our talented youngsters, we are going to warm up with a little piano music. So please join me in welcoming Lily Chen's mother to the stage. The applause was scattered and polite, the kind people give when they are being nice but do not expect much. Malin stood up, her legs feeling weak beneath her, and began the long walk from the back row to the stage. The auditorium was not large, maybe 50 feet from her seat to the stairs, but it felt like a mile. She was aware of every eye on her, of every judgment being made about her work uniform and her tired face and her rough hands. A parent in expensive clothes whispered something to her husband, and they both glanced at Malin with a kind of look that made her want to turn around and run, but she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, past the rows of folding chairs, past the parents with their phones already out, past the banner with its wobbling letters. The 3 stairs to the stage seemed higher than they should have been, and she climbed them carefully, afraid of tripping and adding humiliation to her already overwhelming nervousness. The piano was even worse up close. The keys were yellowed and uneven, some sticking up slightly higher than others. The sustain pedal had a squeak that she could hear even before she sat down, and when she pressed a single key to test the sound, she discovered that the instrument was out of tune in exactly the way she had expected. The upper register sharp, the middle muddy, the bass slightly flat, but none of that mattered. Not really, because she was only going to play a simple nursery rhyme, and even a broken piano could manage that. She sat down on the cracked vinyl bench and positioned herself in front of the keys, her posture corrected automatically. Years of training asserting themselves despite the decades of neglect. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips, and for a moment, she was 7 years old again, sitting at her grandfather's piano in Shanghai. The auditorium was quiet now, the parents waiting with polite patience for the brief musical prelude to end so the real show could begin. No one expected anything from her, and that should have been comforting, but instead it felt like a different kind of tragedy. She took a breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. That was all. Just a simple melody that any child could play. Her fingers found the first note, and she pressed down, and the sound that emerged was thin and slightly flat, exactly what she had expected from this neglected instrument. She played the opening phrase, keeping it simple, keeping it safe, but even as she played, she could feel something stirring inside her, something that had been waking up ever since she downloaded that piano app on her phone. The music wanted more, and her hands wanted more, and somewhere deep inside, Malin wanted more, She glanced at the audience. The opening of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor begins with a question. It is a simple phrase, just a few notes, but it carries within it the weight of everything that will follow. Like the first drop of rain before a storm, Leon played this opening as if she were asking that question to herself, as if she were reaching across 22 years of silence to find out if anyone was still listening. The community center auditorium went still in a way that had nothing to do with politeness. Parents who had been checking their phones stopped mid. Children peeking out from backstage pressed their faces closer to the doorway than Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been bustling about with her clipboard and her nervous energy, froze in place with her mouth slightly open. Something was happening on that stage, something that none of them had expected or prepared for. The battered upright piano, which had seemed so inadequate just moments before, was suddenly producing sounds that did not match its appearance. It was as if the instrument had been waiting for someone who knew how to speak its language, and now that it had found that person, it was determined to show what it could really do. Melin's fingers moved across the keys with a fluidity that seemed impossible given that she had not touched a real piano in over a decade. But the body remembers what the mind tries to forget, and her hands had been practicing in secret all along, playing silent sonatas on kitchen tables and desks and any flat surface they could find. The muscle memory was there, preserved like flowers pressed between the pages of an old book, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. She played through the first theme, the melody rising and falling like a conversation between old friends. The piece was meant to tell a story, and Malin was telling hers, every note carrying the weight of immigration and loss and 22 years of dreams deferred. Her eyes were closed now, and she was no longer in the community center at Al. She was in Shanghai, sitting at her grandfather's piano, playing for Professor Wang at the conservatory. She was 7 years old and being called a miracle. She was 12 years old and watching her old life disappear through an airplane window. She was 34 years old and finally letting herself feel all the things she had been running from. The music swelled into its first major climax, and Milen's whole body moved with it, leaning into the keys with an intensity that made several audience members catch their breath. This was not how people played piano at community center talent shows. This was how people played at concert halls, at competitions, at the kinds of venues that Malin had been destined for before fate intervened. The gray-haired music professor in the back row had taken out his phone and was recording, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to keep the camera steadying. 40 years of teaching music. He had seen many talented students, had helped shape careers that went on to grace the stages of Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center, but he had rarely witnessed what he was witnessing. Now raw, unpolished genius pouring out of someone who had clearly been hiding it for a very long time. Extraordinary, he whispered, and the woman beside him, a parent he did not know, nodded in agreement without taking her eyes off the Staggermeilen. Moved into the second theme, a lyrical passage that Chopin had marked con grazia, meaning with grace. Her touch became lighter here, the notes singing out like a soprano voice above a hushed orchestra. The cheap piano, out of tune and neglected, somehow found within itself the ability to produce something approaching beauty. It was not perfect. Of course, the upper register was still sharp, and some of the keys still stuck, and there were moments when Malin's lack of recent practice showed in small hesitations and slight imprecisions. But these imperfections did not diminish what was happening. If anything, they made it more powerful. This was not a polished performance by a professional musician. This was something raw and more honest. A human being reconnecting with a part of herself that she had believed was lost forever. In the doorway backstage, Lily Chen watched her mother with wide eyes. She had never seen her mother like this. That never imagined that the tired woman who worked double shifts at the dry cleaner could transform into this figure of power and grace. Her mother's face, usually so careful and controlled, was now completely open, showing emotions that Lily had only glimpsed in brief moments before they were quickly hidden away. The children gathered around Lily, drawn by the music. They rehearsed talent show acts, temporarily forgotten. A boy who had been practicing his magic tricks stood with a stuffed rabbit hanging limply from his hand. A group of girls who were supposed to perform a dance number huddled together, watching with the serious attention that children give to things they do not fully understand but know are important. The music built toward the famous presto section, where the tempo increases dramatically and the technical demands become almost impossible. This was where many pianists faltered, where even professionals sometimes lost their way in the cascade of notes that tumbled over each other like water over rocks. Malin did not falter. Her hands flew across the keys with a speed that seemed superhuman, decades of training reasserting themselves through sheer instinct. She was not thinking about the notes anymore. She was feeling them, each one a word in a language she had been forbidden to speak for so long. The audience was completely silent now, not the polite silence of people waiting for something to be over, but the breathless silence of people experiencing something they will remember for the rest of their lives. Mrs. Rodriguez had sat down on the edge of the stage, her clipboard forgotten on the floor beside her, tears streaming down her face without her even realizing it. In the third row, a father had put down his phone and was simply watching, his face showing the expression of someone who has just discovered that there is more to the world than he had previously believed. The piece moved into its final section, a return to the opening theme, but now transformed by everything that had come before. Malin played these final pages with a combination of power and tenderness that seemed to come from somewhere beyond technique, beyond practice, beyond anything that could be taught in a conservatory. She was playing her whole life now. Every struggle and every sacrifice and every moment of joy that she had found despite everything that had been taken from her, she was playing for her daughter, for the mother she had tried to be and the mother she wished she could have been. She was playing for her parents, who had given up everything to give her a chance at a new life. She was playing for Professor Wong, who had seen something in her that no one else could see and had tried so hard to protect it. She was playing for the 7-year-old girl who had been called a miracle, the girl who had been buried but not destroyed, the girl who was finally, after all these years, allowed to speak again. The final chord rang out in the community center, the notes hanging in the air like a question that had finally been answered, and then there was silence. Maylin sat at the piano with her hand still resting on the keys, her eyes still closed, her body trembling with the effort and the emotion of what she had just done. She did not know how long she sat there, could not have said if seconds or minutes had passed. Time had become strange and liquid, the way it does when something important is happening. Then she heard it, a single pair of hands clapping. Somewhere in the back of the room the sound broke the spell, and suddenly everyone was clapping, the applause building like a wave until it filled the entire auditorium. People were standing up, rising from their folding chairs with expressions of amazement and disbelief. The gray-haired music professor was on his feet, his hands coming together so hard that they hurt. Mrs. Rodriguez was still crying, clapping through her tears. Even the children backstage were clapping, though they did not really understand what they were applauding. Maylin opened her eyes and saw the standing ovation through a blur of tears. She had not realized she was crying. She saw Lily running toward the stage, her small face lit up with a joy that Maylin had never seen before. She saw strangers looking at her with wonder and respect. You saw them seeing her, really seeing her. For the first time in 22 years. Who are you? Someone shouted from the crowd, and the question echoed in the auditorium like the final note of a symphony. Alan did not answer, could not answer, because she was only just beginning to remember the answer herself. She stood up from the piano, benched on legs that felt like water, and stepped back from the instrument that had been her first love, her greatest loss, and now, perhaps, her way back to the person she was always meant to be. Lily reached the stage and threw herself into her mother's arms, and Maylin held her tight, feeling her daughter's heart beating against her own. Mama, Lily whispered, Mama, that was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. And Maylin, who had spent 2 decades believing that the best part of herself was dead and buried, finally allowed herself to believe that it might not be too late to find her way back to the music. The community center talent show would continue. Of course there was still magic, tricks and dance numbers and off-key songs to be performed. What everyone who had been in that room would remember this night as the night they witnessed something extraordinary, the night a woman in a dry cleaner's uniform sat down at a broken piano and showed them. The applause continued for what felt like an eternity, wave after wave of sound crashing against Maylin as she stood on the stage holding her daughter. She had not expected this, had not prepared for any of this, and now she did not know what to do with the attention that was pouring over her like warm water. People were shouting things she could not quite hear, calling out questions and compliments that blurred together into a wall of noise. Her legs were shaking so badly that she was not sure how much longer she could stand, and she was grateful when Mrs. Rodriguez finally climbed back onto the stage and gently took the microphone. Well, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice cracking with emotion, I think we can all agree that was not twinkle twinkle little star. Laughter rippled through the audience, the kind of laughter that comes from relief and joy and the shared experience of witnessing something unexpected and wonderful. Mrs. Rodriguez turned to Maylin with an expression of pure amazement. I do not know who you are, she said, but I feel like I should be apologizing for asking you to play a nursery rhyme. Maylin shook her head, not trusting her voice to work properly. She was still crying, tears streaming down her face and dripping onto her faded blue uniform, and she did not care who saw. The locked box in her heart had burst open, and everything she had kept hidden for 22 years was spilling out into the fluorescent-lit gymnasium. Mama, you need to sit down, Lily whispered, tugging at her mother's hand, and Maylin realized that her daughter was right. She let Lily guide her to the edge of the stage, where she sat down with her legs dangling over the side like a child. The audience was still buzzing with energy, people turning to each other and asking questions that no one could answer. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? How was it possible that someone with that kind of talent was working at a dry cleaner in Queens? The gray-haired music professor had made his way to the front of the auditorium, moving with a purpose that suggested he was not going to let Maylin disappear before he got some answers. Excuse me, he said, approaching the stage with his phone still in his hand. My name is Dr. Harold Washington. I am a retired professor of music from City College, and I need to know who you are. Maylin looked at him through her tears, this stranger who was asking her to reveal the secret she had kept for so long. My name is Maylin Chen, she said quietly. Where did you study? Dr. Washington pressed. Who were your teachers? When did you last perform professionally? The questions came rapid fire, the curiosity of a lifelong musician who had just encountered something he could not explain. I studied at the Shanghai Conservatory of Music, Maylin said, and the words felt strange in her mouth after so many years of not saying them. My teacher was Professor Wang Xu. I have not performed professionally in 22 years. Dr. Washington's eyes widened with recognition. The Shanghai Conservatory. Professor Wang, you were one of her students, you know, Professor Wang. I know of her. Everyone in the classical music world knows of her. She trained some of the finest pianists of the last 30 years. He paused, studying Mei Lin's face with an intensity that made her want to look away. Chen, he repeated slowly. Mei Lin Chen. Wait, are you the same Mei Lin Chen who won the National Youth Piano competition in Beijing in 1997? The question hit her like a physical blow, reaching back through the decades to a girl she had tried so hard to forget. Yes, she whispered. That was me. Dr. Washington put his hand over his heart as if he needed to steady himself. I read about you, he said, his voice filled with wonder. There were articles in all the music journals. They called you one of the most promising talents China had ever produced. And then you just vanished. I did not vanish, Mei Lin said. I moved to America. My family lost everything. There was no money for music anymore. The simple explanation contained within it a universe of pain. But Dr. Washington seemed to understand. He had been in the music world long enough to know that talent alone was never enough, that circumstances and luck and money played roles that people did not like to acknowledge. You have been here all this time, he said softly, playing at this level, and no one knew I have not been playing. Mei Lin corrected him. Tonight was the first time I touched a piano in over 10 years. Dr. Washington shook his head in disbelief. That is not possible. No one plays Chopin's first ballade like that without constant practice. The technical demands alone. My hands remember, Mei Lin said, looking down at her rough fingers. Even when I try to make them forget, they remember around them. The talent show was attempting to resume. Mrs. Rodriguez had shepherded the next group of performers onto the stage. A trio of children who were supposed to sing a song from a popular animated movie, but the audience was distracted, still turning in their seats to look at the woman sitting on the edge of the stage, still whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. Lee had not left her mother's side, standing protectively beside her like a small guardian. She did not fully understand what was happening, but she understood that something important had changed, that her mother had revealed a secret that would not go back into hiding. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Washington said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card. I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to call me. There are people who should hear you play, opportunities that might be available. Mei Lin took the card automatically, her mind still too scattered to process what he was saying. I am just a dry cleaner, she said, as if reminding herself as much as him. You were never just anything, Dr. Washington replied firmly, and I suspect you have been telling yourself that lie for far too long. The children on stage were singing now, their young voices sweet but unremarkable after what had come before. Parents were recording on their phones, but their attention was divided, their minds still replaying the music that had filled the room just minutes ago. A woman approached the stage, the same blonde woman in yoga pants who had spoken to Mei Lin before the show. I cannot believe that was you, she said, her earlier condescension replaced by something that looked like genuine respect. You were incredible. Why did you not tell anyone you could play like that? I do not talk about it, Mei Lin said, but that is crazy. You should be performing everywhere. You should be famous. Famous, Mei Lin thought, turning the word over in her mind. She had been on track for fame once, had been groomed for it, had been told it was her destiny, but destiny had other plans. And famous was not a word that belonged in the vocabulary of a woman who worked double shifts to pay rent on a small apartment in Queens. I am tired, she said, standing up from the edge of the stage. I need to take my daughter home, but the show is not over, Mrs. Rodriguez protested, rushing over with her clipboard. And I think people want to talk to you. I know, Mei Lin said, but I have to work tomorrow. And Lily has school. It was such an ordinary statement, such a mundane concern, and yet it captured everything about the dual life Mei Lin had been living. She could play Chopin like a concert pianist, but she still had to wake up at 5 in the morning to press other people's clothes. Dear Washington nodded in understanding. Please call me, he said again. This does not have to end tonight. Mei Lin took Lily's hand and walked toward the exit, feeling the eyes of the entire auditorium following her. People reached out as she passed, touching her arm, congratulating her, asking questions she did not have the energy to answer. She smiled and nodded and kept moving. Her only goal to get herself and her daughter out of this building and into the cool night air. The parking lot was quiet after the noise of the auditorium, and Mei Lin breathed deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. She did not have a car. We had never been able to afford one, so she and Lily would walk the 15 minutes home as they always did. Mama, Lily said as they started down the sidewalk. Why are you crying again? Mei Lin had not realized that the tears had returned, but she could feel them now, warm and wet on her cheeks. Because I am happy, she said, and because I am sad. How can you be both at the same time? It is complicated. When you are older you will understand. Lily seemed to accept this, walking in silence for a few moments before asking her next question. Are you going to play the piano again? Mei Lin looked up at the night sky, at the stars that were barely visible through the light pollution of the city. She thought about the card in her pocket from Dr. Washington, about the standing ovation, about the way her hands had felt on the keys after all those years. I do not know, she admitted. Everything is different now, and I am not sure what happens next. I think you should play again, Lily said with the certainty of a child who sees the world in simple terms. You looked like yourself when you were playing. Like the real you, not the tired you, the real you. Maylin repeated in her mind. She had spent so long burying the real her that she had almost forgotten that person existed, but tonight, for 10 minutes on a stage in a community center, the real Maylin Chen had broken free, and now she had to figure out what to do with this person she had rediscovered. They walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, mother and daughter moving through the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The apartment was dark when they arrived. The same small space that had been their whole world for so many years. Maylin turned on the lights and looked around at the second-hand furniture and the bare walls and the kitchen table where she... The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, at the same time it had gone off every workday for the past 11 years, reached out and silenced it with the automatic motion of someone who had performed this action thousands of times before. Her body was exhausted, having gotten only a few hours of sleep after the events of the night before, but exhaustion was not an excuse that her boss would accept. She got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Lily, who was still sleeping peacefully in the small bedroom they shared. The apartment was cold in the early morning, and Maylin wrapped herself in a thin robe as she made her way to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw the same face she saw every morning, tired eyes, lines that had not been there a few years ago, hair that was starting to show strands of gray, but something was different this morning. Something in the set of her jaw, something in the way she held herself last night had changed her. Even if she did not fully understand how yet, she showered quickly and dressed in her work uniform. The faded blue fabric that had become like a second skin over the years, the name tag that said Linda was pinned to her chest, a constant reminder of the identity she had adopted in this country, the person she had become in order to survive before she left. She checked on Lily one more time, pulling the blanket up to her daughter's chin and pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Lily stirred, but did not wake, and Maylin whispered a quiet goodbye before slipping out the door. The walk to the dry cleaning shop took 20 minutes, through streets that were still dark and quiet at this hour. Maylin had made this walk so many times that she could do it, with her eyes closed, her feet knowing every crack in the sidewalk, every uneven patch of concrete. But this morning she was aware of her surroundings in a way she had not been in years. She noticed the way the streetlights cast pools of yellow on the pavement, the way the early morning air smelled of rain that had fallen overnight, the way a bird was singing somewhere in the darkness even though the sun had not yet risen. It was as if the music had awakened more than just her hands. It had awakened her ability to see and hear and feel the world around her. The dry cleaning shop was located on Roosevelt Avenue, sandwiched between a nail salon and a store that sold cheap electronics. Mr. Park, the owner, was already there when Maylin arrived, unlocking the gate and preparing the machines for another day of work. You look tired, he said in Korean, which Maylin had learned to understand over the years. Even though she responded in English, I did not sleep well. She admitted no excuse for slow work, he replied, but there was no real criticism in his voice. Mr. Park was a hard man in many ways, but he had also been fair to her, giving her hours when she needed them and looking the other way when she had to leave early for Lily's school events. The morning passed in the familiar rhythm of steam and fabric, and his suppressing maturity. Maylin fell into the routine automatically, her hands moving through the motions while her mind wandered elsewhere. She thought about the piano, about how it had felt to sit on that bench again, about the way the music had poured out of her as if it had been waiting all these years for permission to escape. She thought about Dr. Washington and his business card, which was tucked safely in the pocket of her work pants. She thought about what he had said, about opportunities that might be available, about a world she had left behind so long ago. Around 10 in the morning, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She was not supposed to check personal messages during work, but the phone kept buzzing, again and again, until Mr. Park noticed and frowned. Something wrong? He asked. I do not know, Maylin said, pulling out her phone to find dozens of notifications. There were text messages from numbers she did not recognize, missed calls from people she had never heard of, and alerts from social media apps she rarely used. Her heart began to race as she scrolled through the messages, trying to make sense of what was happening. One of the texts was from Lily's school, informing her that reporters had been calling and asking for contact information. Another was from Mrs. Rodriguez at the community center, apologizing profusely and saying that someone had posted a video online. A video of what? Maylin wondered. Though she already knew the answer, she opened her social media app and saw immediately that she had been tagged in a post that had been shared thousands of times. The video was grainy and shaky, filmed on someone's phone from the audience, but the audio was clear enough to capture every note she had played. The caption read, "Dry cleaner worker reveals she is a piano prodigy. This will make you cry." The view count at the bottom of the screen showed 2,347,891 views, and climbing. Maylin felt the floor tilt beneath her feet, felt the walls of the dry cleaning shop closing in around her. This was not supposed to happen. She had spent 22 years making sure this would never happen, and now her secret was spreading across the internet for the entire world to see. Linda, you okay? Mr. Park asked, using the American name on her tag because he did not know her real one. I need to sit down, Maylin said, and she did. Collapsing onto a stool behind the counter with her phone clutched in her shaking hands, Mr. Park came to stand beside her, looking at the screen with a confused expression. "What is this?" he asked. "It is me," Malin said. "From last night, someone recorded me playing the piano. You play piano?" The surprise in his voice reminded her how thoroughly she had hidden this part of herself. She had worked for Mr. Park for 7 years, had spent thousands of hours in this shop, and he had never once suspected that she was anything more than what she appeared to be. "I used to," she said. "A long time ago, in China." Mr. Park watched the video for a moment, his eyebrows rising higher and higher as the music filled the small shop. "This is you?" he asked again, as if he could not reconcile the woman in the video with the employee who had been pressing his customers' clothes for nearly a decade. "Yes, you are very good. Thank you." The phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another stranger trying to reach her. Malin turned off the screen and set the phone face down on the counter, trying to stop the flood of attention that was pouring into her life, but she knew it was too late. Knew that you cannot stop something that has already spread to millions of people. The door to the shop opened, and a woman walked in carrying a bundle of clothes. She was a regular customer, someone Malin had served many times before, and she looked at Malin with eyes that held a new kind of recognition. "Oh my God," the woman said. "It is you. You are the woman from the video. My sister sent it to me this morning. She lives in California and even she has seen it." "I am just here to work," Malin said, but her voice came out small and uncertain. "You're amazing," the woman continued, ignoring her attempt to deflect. "Why are you working here? You should be performing at Carnegie Hall or something." Carnegie Hall, Malin thought, and the words sent a sharp pain through her chest. She had dreamed of Carnegie Hall once, had been told by teachers and critics that it was only a matter of time, but time had run out, and dreams had turned to dust. And now here she was behind the counter of a dry cleaning shop, being reminded of everything she had lost. "Please," she said, "I just want to do my job." The woman seemed to realize that she had crossed a line, and she apologized and handed over her clothes and left. But Malin knew that she was just the first, that there would be more people coming, more questions, more attention that she did not know how to handle. Mr. Park had been watching the whole exchange with his arms crossed over his chest. "Maybe you should go home," he said. "Take the day, figure out what is happening. I cannot afford to miss work." Malin protested. "I am not docking your pay," Mr. Park said, and his voice was gentler than she had ever heard it. "You have worked hard for me for many years. One day will not matter." Malin wanted to argue, wanted to insist on normalcy, but she knew that normalcy was no longer an option. She gathered her things and walked out of the shop into the bright morning sunlight, her phone still buzzing in her pocket, her whole world shifting beneath her feet. The walk home felt different than it had that morning, and not just because the sun was up and the streets were full of people. She felt exposed, as if everyone who passed her knew her secret, as if the video had stripped away the invisibility she had worked so hard to maintain. When she got to her apartment building, there was a man waiting outside the door. He was young, probably in his 20s, and he was holding a microphone and standing next to another person with a camera. "Malin Chen," he called out as she approached. "I am from Channel 7 News. Do you have a few minutes to talk about your incredible performance last night?" Malin shook her head and pushed past him, fumbling for her keys with hands that would not stop trembling. "The whole city is talking about you," the reporter continued, following her to the door. "People want to know your story. They want to know how a dry cleaner worker became an internet sensation overnight." "I do not want to be a sensation," Malin said, finally getting the door open and slipping inside. "I just want to be left alone." She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The building was quiet, most of her neighbors at work or at school, and she was grateful for the silence. She climbed the stairs to her apartment and unlocked the door, and a familiar space that had always felt like a refuge now felt like a hiding place. Her phone rang, and this time she recognized the number. It was the school. Probably the days that followed were unlike anything Malin had ever experienced. The video continued to spread, jumping from platform to platform, shared by music lovers and news outlets and ordinary people who were moved by the story of a forgotten prodigy. By the end of the first week, it had been viewed over 10 million times, and Malin's face was appearing on morning talk shows and entertainment websites around the world. She refused every interview request at first, hiding in her apartment with the curtains drawn, only venturing out to pick up Lily from school and buy groceries. But the world would not leave her alone. Reporters camped outside her building, and her phone rang constantly with calls from numbers she did not recognize. Harold Washington, the music professor from the community center, left message after message, each one more urgent than the last. "Please call me back," he said in one voicemail. "I have been contacted by the New York Philharmonic. They want to meet you. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Malin listened to the message and then deleted it. Just as she had deleted all the others, she was not ready for this. Did not know if she would ever be ready. The girl who had dreamed of concert halls was gone, replaced by a woman who only knew how to survive. But Lily had other ideas. "Mama, you have to stop hiding," she said one evening, finding her mother sitting in the dark kitchen, moving her fingers across the table in the patterns that had become second nature. "I am not hiding," Malin said. "I am protecting us from what? From people who want things from me that I cannot give." Lily sat down across from her mother, her young face serious in the dim light. "But what if you can give it?" she asked. What if all those people are right? And you should be playing music for everyone to hear it. It's not that simple, why not? Malin did not have a good answer, and Lily knew it. The truth was that she was afraid, terrified of stepping back into a world that had rejected her once before. What if she tried and failed? What if the magic of that night at the community center had been a fluke? What if she was not as good as everyone seemed to think? I called that man, Lily said quietly. What man? The professor, Dr. Washington. I found his card in your pocket and I called him. Malin felt a flash of anger followed by something that might have been relief. You should not have done that without asking me. I know, Lily admitted, but someone had to do something, and you were not going to do it yourself. What did he say? He said he is coming over tomorrow at noon, and he is bringing someone important who wants to meet you. Malin wanted to be furious, wanted to send Lily to her room and call Dr. Washington and cancel the whole thing, but she looked at her daughter's hopeful face, at the determination in those dark eyes that were so much like her own, and she felt her resistance crumbling. Who is this important person? She asked. He did not say, but he said it could change everything. Change everything, Malin thought, as if everything had not already changed the moment she sat down at that piano the next day. She cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, scrubbing surfaces that did not need scrubbing and arranging furniture that did not need arranging. It was something to do with her nervous energy, a way to feel in control when everything else seemed to be spinning out of her grasp. At exactly noon, there was a knock at the door. Malin opened it to find Dr. Washington standing in the hallway with a woman she did not recognize. The woman was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and the kind of posture that suggested decades of classical training. She was wearing a simple black dress and pearls, and her eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in Malin's appearance. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Washington said, thank you for agreeing to see us. This is Madame Elizabeth Renault. She is the artistic director of Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall. The words hit Malin like a physical blow, and she had to grip the doorframe to steady herself. May we come in? Madame Renault asked, and her voice carried a French accent that softened the formality of her words. Malin stepped aside and let them enter, acutely aware of how small and shabby her apartment must look to someone who ran one of the most prestigious concert venues in the world. They sat in the living room, Dr. Washington on the worn couch and Madame Renault in the chair by the window. Lily hovered in the doorway to the kitchen, watching with wide eyes. I have seen the video, Madame Renault said, getting straight to the point. I have watched it perhaps 50 times, and each time I see something new. It was just one performance, Malin said. I had not played in many years. I am not what I used to be. That is precisely what makes it remarkable, Madame Renault replied. What I saw in that video was not technique. Technique can be taught. Technique can be practiced. What I saw was something much rarer. I saw a soul that speaks through music. Malin did not know how to respond to such a statement. She had heard similar things from Professor Wong so many years ago, but she had stopped believing them when she stopped playing. I did not come here to flatter you, Madame Renault continued. I came here to offer you an opportunity. Carnegie Hall is hosting a benefit concert in 6 months. The proceeds will go to a scholarship fund for immigrant children pursuing music education. I would like you to be the featured performer. The room seemed to tilt, and Malin gripped the arm of her chair to keep from falling. That is impossible, she said. I have not practiced properly in over 20 years. I do not have a piano. I am not prepared for something like that. Then we will prepare you, Madame Renault said simply. We will provide a piano. We will arrange for practice space. We will give you everything you need. But why? Why me? There must be hundreds of pianists who would be better suited. Madame Renault leaned forward, her eyes intense. Because hundreds of pianists do not have your story. Your story matters, Mrs. Chen. It speaks to every child who has had to give up their dreams because of circumstances beyond their control. It speaks to every immigrant who has sacrificed everything for a chance at a new life. It speaks to every person who has ever been told that it is too late. The scholarship fund, Dr. Washington added, would be named in your honor. The Malin Chen Scholarship for Immigrant Musicians. It would help children like you were. Children with talent but without resources. Malin felt tears burning in her eyes, felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about the 7-year-old girl in Shanghai who had been called a miracle. She thought about the 12-year-old girl who had watched her dreams disappear through an airplane window. She thought about all the years of silence, all the music that had stayed locked inside her, all the things she had given up in order to survive. And then she looked at Lily, standing in the doorway with her hands clasped together, her face glowing with hope and pride. I will do it, Malin said, and the words came out before she could stop them. I will do it, but not for Carnegie Hall, and not for my story. I will do it for the children who need to know that their dreams do not have to die. Madame Renault smiled, the first real smile Malin had seen from her. That is exactly what I hoped you would say. They talked for another hour, working out details and timelines and logistics. A piano would be delivered to the apartment the following week, donated by a company that had seen the video and wanted to help. Malin would have access to practice rooms at the Manhattan School of Music. A team would help her prepare for the publicity that would come with such a high-profile performance. It was overwhelming, all of it, but Malin held on to the image of those scholarship children, the little boys and girls who would have chances that she had been denied by the time Dr. Washington and Madame Renault left. It was late afternoon, and the apartment was quiet. Lily came to sit beside her mother on the couch. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yes," Maylin admitted. "More scared than I have ever been." "Good," Lily said. "That means it matters." Maylin pulled her daughter close and held her tight. "When did you become so wise?" she asked. "I learned from watching you," Lily replied. "You taught me that being scared is not the same as being weak." They sat together as the sun set outside the window, mother and daughter, on the edge of something neither of them could fully comprehend in 6 months. Maylin Chen would walk onto the stage at Carnegie Hall in 6 months. She would face her fears and her past and everything she had lost in 6 months. The standing ovation that had begun at a community center in Queens would echo through one of the most famous concert halls in the world. But for now, in this small apartment, there was only this moment, this breath, this quiet before the storm, and somewhere deep inside Maylin, a 7-year-old girl was finally beginning to believe that miracles could happen twice. The 6 months that followed were the hardest and most beautiful of Maylin's life. Every day began before sunrise, not with the alarm clock that summoned her to the dry cleaning shop, but with an urgency that came from within. The piano that had been delivered to her apartment was a Steinway grand, worth more than everything she owned, and it took up almost half the living room. She did not care about the cramped space. She only cared about the music. For the first few weeks, her hands refused to cooperate the way they had on that magical night at the community center. The muscle memory was there, but it was buried under years of neglect, and coaxing it back to the surface required patience. She had forgotten she possessed. She practiced scales until her fingers ached. We've worked through exercises she had learned as a child in Shanghai, rebuilt her technique one note at a time. Da Washington came to check on her progress twice a week, and he brought other teachers with him, specialists in different aspects of performance. They pushed her hard, harder than anyone had pushed her since Professor Wong, and sometimes she wanted to give up, wanted to admit that she had made a terrible mistake, but then she would look at the scholarship fund that was already being established in her name, at the letters from children around the world who had seen the video and found hope in her story, and she would sit back down at the piano and try again. The media attention did not slow down. If anything, it intensified as word of the Carnegie Hall concert spread. Magazine covers featured her face, television programs told her story, and journalists from a dozen countries requested interviews. Maylin agreed to some of them, learning to tell her story in a way that focused not on her own suffering but on the message she wanted to share. "Dreams do not expire," she said in one interview that was watched by millions. "They wait for us, even when we forget them. They are patient and they are stubborn, just like the people who carry them." The phrase became a hashtag, a slogan, a rallying cry for people around the world who had been told that it was too late for them. Letters poured in from every corner of the globe, from former musicians who had given up their instruments, from immigrants who had sacrificed their passions to build new lives, from parents who had put aside their own dreams to focus on their children. Each letter was a reminder of why she was doing this, why she was pushing through the fear and the exhaustion and the doubt. But the most important correspondence came from Shanghai. Professor Wong, now in her 80s, had seen the video. Her letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, written in the elegant Chinese characters that Maylin remembered from her childhood. "My dear student," the letter began, "I always knew you would find your way back to the music. The gift is too strong to be silenced forever. I am old now and cannot travel, but I will be listening when you play at Carnegie Hall, and I will be proud, as I have always been proud, even when you thought I had forgotten you." Maylin read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Before she was able to set it down, Professor Wong had not forgotten her. The woman who had shaped her talent and believed in her future had been waiting, just like the music, for Maylin to return. The Shanghai Conservatory of Music released a statement acknowledging Maylin as one of their most distinguished former students. They offered her an honorary position on their faculty, which she declined, but she accepted their invitation to establish a scholarship program that would support young musicians in China. "I want to build bridges," she told a reporter who asked about her plans, "between the country I came from and the country that became my home. Music does not recognize borders, and neither should opportunity." As the concert date approached, the pressure became almost unbearable. Maylin practiced 8 hours a day, sometimes more, pushing her body and her mind to limits she had not tested since she was a teenager. She lost weight because she forgot to eat, and Lily had to remind her to sleep, reversing the roles that had defined their relationship for so long. "Mama, you need to take care of yourself," Lily said one night, finding her mother still at the piano at 2 in the morning. "The concert is not worth anything if you collapse before you get there." "I am fine," Maylin insisted. But she knew her daughter was right. She was running on adrenaline and fear, pushing herself toward perfection because she was terrified of failure. The world was watching now, expecting a miracle, and she was not sure she had another miracle to give. Da Washington arranged for her to speak with a therapist, someone who specialized in performance anxiety and the particular pressures faced by classical musicians. "You are not trying to prove anything," the therapist told her during one session. "You have already proved everything you need to prove. The video, the response, the letters from around the world, all of that is evidence that you are exactly who you are supposed to be." "But what if I disappoint them?" Maylin asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since she agreed to the concert. What if I cannot do again what I did that night? Then you will do something different, the therapist said. Something that is true to who you are now, not who you were 22 years ago. The audience is not coming to see perfection. They're coming to see you, to see you. Maylin repeated to herself in the weeks that followed. She had spent so long hiding, so long making herself invisible, that the idea of being seen was both terrifying and liberating. The concert program was set. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the same piece she had played at the community center, followed by selections from Liszt and Rachmaninoff that would showcase her range and power. The rehearsals at Carnegie Hall were scheduled for the week before the performance, and walking into that legendary space for the first time nearly brought Maylin to her knees. The hall was exactly as she had always imagined it, with its red seats and its perfect acoustics and its history of hosting the greatest musicians in the world. She stood on the stage where legends had stood, looking out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with people who had come to hear her play. This is really happening, she whispered to herself. The piano on the stage was the finest instrument she had ever touched, every key responsive, every note pure and true. She played a few scales, adjusting to the feel of this magnificent machine, and the sound that rose up and filled the empty hall was unlike anything she had ever produced. For the first time since agreeing to the concert, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually be able to do this. The tickets sold out within hours of going on sale. People flew in from around the world, booking hotel rooms and adjusting their schedules, determined to be present for what was being called the comeback of the decade. The scholarship fund had already raised more money than anyone had anticipated, enough to support dozens of young musicians for years to come. Maylin insisted on continuing to work at the dry cleaning shop until the final week before the concert. You do not need to do this anymore, Mr. Park told her. You are famous now. You could do anything. This is part of who I am, Maylin replied. I do not want to forget where I came from. But on her last day at the shop, Mr. Park surprised her with a small party. The other employees had gathered together, people she had worked beside for years without really knowing, and they had made a banner that read "Good luck, Maylin," in letters that were only slightly crooked. We always knew you were special, one of them said, even when you were just pressing clothes. Maylin cried then, overwhelmed by the kindness of people she had kept at a distance for so long. She had built walls to protect herself from pain, but those walls had also kept out love and connection and the simple warmth of human friendship. The night before the concert, she could not sleep. She lay in bed watching the ceiling, running through the music in her mind, her fingers twitching against the blankets as if playing an invisible keyboard. Lily came into her room and climbed into bed beside her, something she had not done since she was very young. I am proud of you, Mama, she said. No matter what happens tomorrow, I am scared, Maylin admitted. More scared than I have ever been, I know, Lily said, but you are also brave. You are the bravest person I know. They lay together in the darkness, mother and daughter, and somewhere in the city, Carnegie Hall waited for the morning that would change everything. Outside the window, the lights of New York glittered like stars, like promises, like the dreams of everyone who had ever looked at that city and believed that anything was possible tomorrow. Maylin Chen would walk onto the most famous stage in the world tomorrow. She would face 30 years of silence and struggle and sacrifice tomorrow. She would play not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told that their best days were behind them. And tomorrow, finally, she would discover whether the girl who had been called a miracle still had one more miracle left to give. The morning of the concert dawned gray and cold, with rain threatening from clouds that hung low over Manhattan. Maylin woke early, her body tense with anticipation, and made herself eat breakfast even though she had no appetite. Lily sat across from her at the small kitchen table, watching her mother with a mixture of excitement and concern. You are going to be amazing, Lily said, for perhaps the 100th time that week. Thank you, sweetheart, Maylin replied, though her voice was barely above a whisper. The dress for the concert hung in the closet, a gift from a designer who had been moved by her story. It was simple and elegant, black silk that would catch the stage lights without distracting from the music, and wearing it made Maylin feel like a different person, like the artist she had once been trained to become. May Carr arrived at noon to take her to Carnegie Hall for final preparations. The driver was professional and quiet, understanding without being told that his passenger needed silence. Maylin watched the city pass by outside the window, the streets that had been her home for more than 2 decades, the neighborhoods where she had worked and struggled and raised her daughter alone. She thought about her parents, who had sacrificed everything to bring her to this country. They had both passed away years ago, never knowing that their daughter would one day perform at Carnegie Hall, never seeing the redemption that their sacrifice had made possible. But she believed they were watching somehow, from wherever spirits go, and she hoped they would be proud. The backstage area at Carnegie Hall was a blur of activity. People rushing back and forth with clipboards and headsets and worried expressions. Was led to a private dressing room where she could warm up and collect herself. Before the performance, a beautiful Steinway sat in the corner, provided specifically for her use, and she spent an hour running through passages, keeping her fingers limber and her mind focused. Washington came to check on her at 3 o'clock, his face beaming with an excitement he could barely contain. The house is sold out, he said. There are people standing outside hoping for cancellations, and the concert is being live-streamed to audiences in 30 countries. 30 countries. Malin thought, and the number seemed impossible, absurd. The kind of thing that happened to other people in other lives. How are you feeling? Dr. Washington asked, terrified. She admitted, but also ready. I think I have been ready for this my whole life. I just did not know it until now at 6:30. There was a knock at her dressing room door. Lily entered, wearing a new dress of her own, her dark hair brushed until it shone, her young face radiant with pride. It is almost time. Mama Malin took her daughter's hands in her own, these hands that had worked so hard for so long, these hands that had pressed other people's clothes and scrubbed other people's floors, these hands that were about to touch the keys of a Steinway Grand on the most famous stage in the world. I could not have done this without you, she said. You believed in me when I had forgotten how to believe in myself. That is what daughters are for. Lily replied with a smile. They hugged, holding each other tight. And then it was time. The walk from the dressing room to the stage felt like a journey through time, through all the years and all the struggles and all the silent music that had been building. Toward this moment, Malin stood in the wings, listening to the murmur of the audience beyond the curtain. Thousands of people who had come to hear her play Madame Renaud appeared beside her, elegant as always in a silver gown. Are you ready? She asked. No, Malin said honestly, but I am going to do it anyway. Madame Renaud smiled, a warm smile that softened her usually stern features. That is the only kind of courage that matters. The lights in the hall dimmed, and the audience fell silent. An announcer's voice echoed through the space, introducing Malin Chen, telling the abbreviated version of her story, the prodigy, the immigrant, the lost years, the miraculous return. And then the stage manager touched her arm and said, "You are on." Malin walked out onto the stage of Carnegie Hall. The applause that greeted her was overwhelming, a wall of sound that washed over her like a wave. She could see the faces in the front rows, strangers and friends. Dr. Washington and Madame Renaud and Mrs. Rodriguez from the community center. She could see Lily sitting in the seat of honor, her small hands clapping so hard they must have hurt. And she could feel the presence of everyone who was watching from around the world, the millions of people who had been touched by her story and wanted to witness this moment. She walked to the piano and stood beside it, and the applause gradually faded into expectant silence. She had prepared remarks, a short speech that she had practiced with the same diligence she had applied to the music, and she took a breath and began to speak. 22 years ago, she said, her voice clear and steady despite her racing heart. I was told that my dream was over. I was told that the music had to stop, and I believed it. I believed it for so long that I forgot who I really was. The audience was perfectly still, hanging on every word. Tonight, I am not playing for Carnegie Hall, and I am not playing for fame or recognition. I am playing for every child who has been told that it is too late, for every immigrant who has sacrificed their passion for survival, for every person who has locked away a piece of themselves because the world made them believe they had no other choice. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Dreams do not expire. They wait for us, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, but they wait, and if we are brave enough to reach for them again, they welcome us back like old friends. She sat down at the piano and positioned her hands over the keys. This is for everyone who is still waiting. This is for everyone who is still hoping. This is for my daughter Lily, who taught me that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be. She began to play the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, rose up and filled Carnegie Hall with a sound that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the instrument itself. It was the same piece she had played at the community center, but it was also completely different, refined by months of practice, deepened by the journey she had taken, transformed by everything she had learned about herself and her music. She played through the first theme, the melody soaring and dipping like a bird in flight. She played through the technical passages with a precision that silenced any doubts about whether her skills had returned, and she played with an emotional depth that came from 34 years of living, of losing, of finding her way back to the thing she loved most. The audience was transfixed, barely breathing, caught in the spell of the music. Some of them were crying, moved by the beauty of the performance and by the knowledge of what it had taken to arrive at this moment. Some of them were leaning forward in their seats, their mouths slightly open, experiencing something that they would remember for the rest of their lives. Malin was no longer aware of them. She was no longer aware of the cameras or the live stream or the 30 countries watching from afar. She was only aware of the music, with a conversation between her fingers and the keys, of the story she was telling through every phrase and every note. She was 7 years old again, playing for Professor Wong at the conservatory. She was 12 years old, saying goodbye to her grandfather's piano. She was 34 years old, sitting at a battered upright in a Queens community center, letting the music break free after 22 years of silence. She was all of these people at once, and she was also someone new, someone who had been forged in the fire of struggle and emerged stronger than before. The piece built toward its climax, the notes cascading faster and faster, building to the dramatic conclusion that Chopin had crafted nearly 200 years ago. And when she struck the final chord, when the last notes rang out and faded into silence, there was a moment of absolute stillness. Then Carnegie Hall erupted. The audience rose to their feet as one, their applause thundering through the legendary space. People were cheering and crying and calling out her name. and the sound was so loud that Maylin could feel it in her chest like a second heartbeat. She stood up from the piano bench and faced them. This sea of strangers who had become witnesses to her resurrection. She bowed deeply, and the applause only grew louder. She looked for Lily and found her in the front row, standing on her seat, tears streaming down her face. Clapping with her whole body, she looked for Dr. Washington and found him beside Madame Renaud, both of them on their feet, both of them beaming with a pride that they had somehow earned by believing in her. The standing ovation lasted for 11 minutes. Maylin lost count of how many times she bowed, how many times she looked up to find the audience still standing, still clapping, still celebrating not just her performance but her story, her survival, her return. When she finally walked off the stage, she was trembling so hard she could barely stand. Lily ran backstage and threw herself into her mother's arms, and they held each other while the applause continued to thunder from beyond the curtain. "You did it, Mama," Lily sobbed. "You really did it." "We did it," Maylin corrected her. "We did it together." In the weeks and months that followed, life would change in ways that Maylin could not have imagined. There would be more concerts, more interviews, more opportunities than she knew what to do with. The scholarship fund would grow to support hundreds of young musicians around the world. She would return to Shanghai to visit Professor